Om Gananatva Ganapatigum Havamahe Kavim Kavinamupamashravasthamam Jyeshtharajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspata Anashrinvannutibisidasadanam Mahaganapataye Namaha Prano Devi Saraswati Vaje Bhirvajinivati Dhinam Avitriyavatu Ano Divo Brihatav Parvata Saraswati Yajatha Gantu Yajnam Havan Devi Jujushana Gritachi Shagmano Vachamushati Shrunotu Vagdevyai Namaha Om Shraddhaya Samidhyate Shraddhaya Vindate Havihi Shraddham Bhagasya Murdhani Vachasa Vedayamasi Priyagya Shraddhe Dadataha Priyagya Shraddhe Didhasataha Priyam bhojeshu yajvasu idamma uditam kradhi yathadeva asureshu shraddhamugreshu chakrire evam bhojeshu yajvasu asmakamuditam kradhi shraddhan deva yajamanaha Vayugopa upasate Shraddhagam Hridayaya Kutya Shraddhaya Huyate Havihi Shraddham Pratarhavamahe Shraddham Madhyandinam Pari Shraddhagam Suryasya Nimrichi Shraddhe Shraddha Paye Hama Shraddha Devanadhivaste Shraddha Vishvamidam Jagat Shraddham Kamasya Mataram Havisha Vardhayamasi Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Namaskar. The chanting this morning was by Jens Kenyard. He's learned chanting from Shantala Sriramaya, who is actually based in Belgium, and she's a student of the Veda Pandits, Sri Chalakere brothers. Swagatam and welcome to all our esteemed speakers, guests and audiences from around the world to our annual event, Namaste 2021, a global Utsava of Indian soft power, brought to you by the Center for Soft Power, an arm of Indic Academy, in collaboration with the ICCR. This is our fourth day and sixth session, Curry and Beyond, Indian food on the global palate. Food is considered divine, a gift of Goddess Annapurneshwari, hence to be treated with due respect in the Indian ethos. I remember my mother would always say, don't enter the kitchen or cook if you're not in a good mood, for your emotions will affect the food and in turn the person who consumes it. In the days gone by, I should say, or should I say our ancient tradition is, the day began with honoring of the stove and a prayer to Agni and a prayer to all the ingredients and then to food itself. That is the importance that food played in our society. Always one of respect, for we are a society that believes that all the world, all creation is only the supreme divine. This morning we have with us Sri Harikiran Vadlamani, who is the founder of the Indic Academy, someone who is ever committed to our country and culture, and also very, very interested in food. So over to you, Hari. for your opening remarks for today.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Akka, for that wonderful presentation that you arranged from Shantalaji. It was extraordinary, uplifting experience. Thank you very much for that. On the 1st of August, 6:30 p.m., I had a very interesting experience. The #1 restaurant in the world, 11 Madison Park in New York, said that they were opening the bookings. And I wanted to make a reservation. Exactly at 6:30, I was waiting. That book button became blue and I clicked on it, hoping to find reservation. None was available. Everything was great. Not available on any single day. I'm asked to come back and put on a wait list and come back in September. The interesting thing about 11 Madison Park is from the June 8th of this year, they have reoriented themselves as plant-based restaurant. Imagine that the #1 restaurant in the world is now a plant-based restaurant. I Googled before this session, best vegetarian vegan restaurants in the world in Berlin, in London, New York, San Francisco, in Los Angeles. And I could not find even one Indian restaurant there, except Divya Altar's restaurant. So the world is moving towards a plant-based diet. And India, with its 29 states and an extraordinary diversity of vegetarian cuisine, is not featuring in any of the city's top restaurants. Meanwhile, Escoffier, which is in the top 3 or top 5 culinary arts institutes in the world, has launched its first plant-based diet 15-month diploma program. Cornell University has a course which is unique, which not any other university is offering. Very few universities are offering. Cornell is offering a self-paced course on plant-based nutrition. These are the trends that are emerging in the world. Let's take a step back and look at this concept of culinary diplomacy. In Asia, there are 5 countries that have looked at culinary diplomacy. Pioneered by Thailand, Korea, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Taiwan. These are the 5 states, 5 countries in Asia. We have one Peru in South America. All those countries believed in their diet, in their cuisine, and that is something of value that they need to offer to the world at large. And they created a culinary diplomacy program. We all know about Thailand and the kind of success that it has achieved. When they started in 2001, they had some 1,500 restaurants in the world outside of Thailand. And they made a very, very systematic approach. They gave a standard design. They gave financing. They encouraged trained chefs. And over a period of 10 years today, even though the population of Thai in the US is minuscule, very less when compared to Indians or when compared to Chinese or when compared to Mexicans, the number of restaurants in the US far outnumber. And that is because of a systematic, conscious policy by the government. Today, after how yoga has grown, India has a unique opportunity because it's a tsunami out there of a tectonic shift that is happening in the world, shifting to plant-based diet. We have a responsibility to take this opportunity and offer our wonderful scriptural, textual practices, traditions of both Ayurveda as well as plant-based in a systematic way. We at Indic Academy are pursuing this. We have launched a course, a plant-based Ayurvedic nutrition course by Dr. Baswati Bhattacharya. Phenomenal response, more than 100 participants. Because we are infusing, there's an intersectionality of plant-based diet with Ayurveda. And there's a need for us to take that and promote it to the world. We're also launching at Indica Yoga a plant-based scholarship program to publish books, to publish coffee table books, to publish books on plant-based diet, discovering each state. And that's a program that we are planning to launch. At NICE, a plant-based fellowship is also in the annual, wherein we're going to encourage entrepreneurs, chefs to come. We will put them through a course. We'll give them a subscription to the Cornell course and systematically train them to be an entrepreneur and then help them raise financing. This is the kind of opportunity that we have today that we should not let this go. We have a wonderful panel, and I'm very excited to see this panel that Akka has curated. Deepa is a dear friend. She is an expert in nutrition. She in fact conceptualized a nutrition program for COVID patients. We have launched that a few months back. I'm happy to see her on the panel. I had a chat with her and said that we must talk about a Cornell-like program soon. And she said, yes, we'll take this conversation forward to create a program that is a plant-based and Ayurvedic nutrition program. Of course, Krishnendu Reddy is there. I had an opportunity to interact with him briefly over email a couple of months back. And he's an author. I request him to look at India Food Studies program in NYU. He already does a food studies program. I also request Colin, who has published so many books, to look at a plant-based Indian coffee table book. And I request Thiruji that we should encourage entrepreneurship. I already saw that he's focused on entrepreneurship. And I request that we should encourage plant-based entrepreneurship through his college. I welcome you all. And I now leave the proceedings to Akka.
Thank you, Hari. Varsha?
Thank you, Hariji, for your opening remarks. We're glad you could join us today. I'd like to introduce our first speaker and moderator for this session, Dr. Deepa Prakash. Dr. Deepa is the Director R&D at Kadamba, an organization working on green nanoscience, functional foods, and allied sciences. She's also the Principal Consultant at Anna Brahma Consultancy. Earlier, she worked as a scientist at CFTRI Mysore. She's helped design and develop food products for children suffering from phenylketonuria. She engages with farmers for development of farm-gate food processing units. So we are very pleased to have you with us today, Dr. Deepa. Welcome. With that, I hand over the session to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Varsha. Namaste. Thank you, Hariji. Thank you, Vijayaka. Actually, I've been trained as a traditional Western nutritionist, and I had a turning point in my life. There was a conference curated and hosted by Hariji on soft power. And that's when I got exposed to the depth of Indian knowledge, which is already available in food. And that, in fact, changed my entire research dynamics and changed my career path in a very big way. I'd like to record my thanks to Hariji, Vijayji for all this. Curry and Beyond is a very beautifully articulated title. Traditional Indian food is, traditional food is part of every civilization. And ancient civilizations in particular have defined food, agriculture, way of cooking, preservation, processing in a very scientific way. Today, with the situation outside, we see a lot of new food products with very interesting jargon, antioxidants, probiotics, prebiotics. All this already exists in traditional food. And various different stages of our life has various dietary diversity requirements, which is actually already recorded in our Vedas, our Itihasas and Puranas. And the rediscovery today is done by phenomenal think tanks like Center for Thappa, who walk up with both science, knowledge, with the traditional outlook, as well as absolutely strong facts on hand, changing the way the world is going to eat. Today's program with lovely intellectuals are from the arena of food and allied disciplines, and we look forward to the great new information and advice from them. And I think the program is going to truly show us the way that science is beyond just the sensory perception of curry. I, with your kind permission, would like to introduce our first speaker, Chef K. Tirunjana Sambandam. He's the principal at the Welcome Group Graduate School of Hotel Administration, Manipal. He's been part of this institute since year 2000, and he has served as HOD of the Food Production Department, Operation Department, and Department of Culinary Arts. He's a maestro. He has earned his repute over 3 decades for his diligence, robust leadership qualities, and passion for the industry. He brings to the table a huge repertoire of of knowledge and expertise in dynamics of hospitality, culinary education, hotel administrations and operations. His strong dexterity comes from his vast experience and extensive cognizance from skillfully managing hospitality and culinary programs. And with the interactions I've had with him, I'm very excited. He's a deeply scientific person. Sir, we are excited to hear you speak. Over to you, Chef.
Good morning and good evening, my other panelist member. On this outset, I would like to thank first and foremost the organizer for giving me this opportunity, and special thanks to Vijayalakshmi Madam for tirelessly coordinating, and as well as Varsha for this event. Now, I would like to thank Mr. Hari also for giving me this opportunity. Now, I've been working as an academician in the past 22 years. Prior to that, I was worked in various hotel chain like Taj and Residency, and then I have opted to come to academic side. Now, it is a big learning for me when you spend 10 years in industry and then you opted to choose an academic. And in the past 22 years, I've seen the students' mindset and how it's evolved over a period of time, and what these youngsters, what we call it Gen Z, which they have a lot of knowledge about the sustainability, and also they are very keen to learn about going back to their roots. I think Mr. Hari had set the floor that talking about 11 Madison Park and so on and so forth. I'm sure that now what I'm going to talk on next 10 minutes, I'm going to share a couple of slides which I've prepared for this webinar. You all can see me, my slide? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Now, I'm going to talk on purely on a chef perspective. Now, my talk will be on how in a pre-independence and post-independence, what is the way forward? That's what I'm going to present to all of you. And please feel free to ask any questions. And I don't want to go on monologue or however the Q&A session set. I am ready to take the question and answer session later on also. So now coming to, sorry. One minute. Now, just wanted to take you to the timeline because when we talk about the Indian cuisine, how it has evolved over the period of time, and you all know that the history of Indian cuisine dates back almost close to more than 10,000 years, and trends from abroad and have been mixed and fused with those of India. Now, what is we have learned, and then if you see that the first one, which is started from the Ayurveda, Mr. Hari just spoke about the importance of Ayurveda and yoga as on date, but still we have a long way to go. Now, you also know that Indus Valley civilization, which been very how it has been evolved, and then talking about the cooking utensils, they've mainly focused on the crockery, and there are several studies has been done. And we all know that emergence of Buddhism and Jainism, Jains were strong believers of non-violence, and then that is how the vegetarianism will become more popular. And when we talk about 12,000 AD, golden age, wherein that is where people are got to know about Purika, that is Puri, and also about talking about Dahivada. Right. So lot of examples need to be given, but however, considering timeline, I'm just taking you through the timeline of how. Now, we all believe that, the tomatoes, chilies, and potatoes came from abroad. Until then, that we've been using our whatever the geographical, India's a vast country. Now we talk about 29 states. And then what is it, Vasco da Gama, what we gave back to, rather than, we talk about what Vasco da Gama gave to Indian cuisine, but what is it we need to learn? If you see that Portuguese, we were the, India was pioneer to introduce them rice, and that is how the Portuguese, it's one rice is one of the staple food. And then the Mughals were, brought to us the baking techniques. Till then, that we always used to have the deep fried or shallow fried breads, but Mughals were pioneer to introduce nuts, and their cuisine is rich and vast. And then we talk about the British rule, and then how Britishers tweaked their dishes when they were stayed 100 years in India. So now what has happened post independence, because if a timeline we need to talk, we can talk about so much, but I am talking here as a chef perspective. Now, how post independence, particularly in UK, how Indian restaurants were emerged. Now, if you talk about Bombay Brasserie in 1982, which was a real, the people, British people could experience Indian food. Now, as on date, we talk about 3.5 pounds of sterling pounds market for Indian food on an average. If you talk about the disposable income of the people who would like to experience Indian food. So that's how it is. Now, you see that the growth of how the Indian cuisine ventured into global. Chutney Mary, actually 1990, they've started. And then Cafe Spice, which is also one of the prominent restaurants. Then we talk about Tamarind, Zaika, Koilan. What all these chefs, the major shift happened, we've been serving traditional food, talking about the signature dishes of, it could be a chicken tikka, or it could be a, shami kebab, and so on and so forth. but how they transformed Indian cuisine and created awareness among the global customers. Now the credit goes to, these are the chefs, Chef Alfred Prasad, who was a founder chef of the Tamarind, and then followed by Atul Kochhar. Now Atul Kochhar still runs his own restaurant called Benares, and all these chefs except Cyrus Todiwala, talking about Alfred Prasad and Chef Atul Kochhar, Vinit Bhatia, Chef Sriram Ailur, all of them are Michelin star chef. Now, Chef Cyrus Todiwala, what he has done, he infused Indian cooking techniques along with the French culinary tradition. So that was the first person to give tweak and then to make it. Till then, that we have been considering Indian food can be served only platter to plate. Now, if you look at that, what Chef Floyd, late Chef Floyd, I think Professor Krishnandu and Madam Colin must be knowing about Chef Floyd's work, what he did in New York when he started with Pauwala. Then he also was instrumental for launching the Bombay Canteen in Mumbai. Now, he was instrumental to showcase the Indian cuisine in the US. And the great thing which he has done, talking about, he wants to, continue to believe that, we have to showcase the traditional food. Of course, when the commercial restaurants operate, they need to focus on commercial aspects, and they need to make the menus accordingly. That is what. But however, Chef Floyd's contribution, people never forget that what he has done to Indian cuisine in US. And unfortunately, we missed, we lost Chef Floyd during this pandemic, the first wave in year 2020. Now, next, you talk about Gagan Anand. Gagan Anand, a young chef who ventured into Thailand, and he was the first, chef to receive Michelin star in Thailand. Till then, that there are so many, type of Thai food was available within the Thailand. But Gagan Anand was bold enough to take the Indian cuisine and present it to contemporary way, not altering too much of authenticity, but however, he focused on the presentation, and he was a pioneer to bring grazing portions rather than, when you go to the restaurant, you will order for one or two dishes, but he was a pioneer to start about the grazing portion. Now, followed by, Chef Vikas Khanna, sorry. How Chef Vikas Khanna and Chef Hari Naik, they are from Vaksha, and then 1994 they left, 1995 they left India and then joined Culinary Institute of America. From there, they struggled, and then they want to showcase Indian cuisine the way which they want to, and looking at the commercial aspects. Now, of course, Chef Vikas Khanna is not with Junoon now, but he was the man behind to get 8 consecutive year Michelin star in New York. And Hari Naik was the first person to introduce the frozen desserts and ice cream based desserts, wherein he tweaked with the Indian spices. And I'm talking about in the year 1999, 1998. So our chefs are doing, whatever good possible, but we'll come to, I will just share that, what is it we need to do way forward. Now, talking about Chef Manish Mehrotra, he was the first Indian chef to talk about the progressive Indian cuisine. Chef Manish Mehrotra focused on the cuisine which is from the northern part of India, how we can present it. His focus was talking about how we can use local produce as well as, and then creating a various textures and flavors and aroma. And when he talk about, I would say that he is a father of progressive Indian cuisine. And what the initial restaurant, it was started in Delhi, and eventually he went and ventured into abroad as well. Now, this young chef, Sri Charan Venkatesan, coming from Brahmin family, typical from Trichy, and this chef focusing on Chola dynasty food, wherein his restaurant is Nadodi, which is based in Malaysia, which is in KL. And so he's doing wonders with the Indian food, basically focusing on South Indian food. And his restaurant is featured in one of the top 100 restaurants in the world. Now his restaurant is 99th position, but I think I'm sure with this innovation and creativity and more he will offer to the global customers. Next, talking about Chef Garima Arora, she was mentored and nurtured by Gagan Anand, and Garima was the first Indian woman chef, to get a Michelin star in the Bangkok. Her concept also, which is almost similar to what Chef Manish Mehrotra and Sri Charan was doing. But however, she actually started initiative to doing research on Indian cuisine and culture. It is called, the food forward of India. But however, due to pandemic, due to a lot of, the financial losses, she could not continue that. I'm sure that she will, she formed a team with youngsters of 14 members team, which, she wants to go in, dive into deep of Indian cuisine and food culture. Now, next, talking about Chef Nikhil Nagpal, he works in ITC Grand Chola. This is South Indian molecular gastronomy. But if you have a meal in Avartan, the entire 11-course range of meal, if you see that ingredients, which is all sourced out from locally from in and around Chennai, the entire menu, all 11-course menu, which is completely based on the local cuisine, and also they have a separate 11-course menu on a vegetarian-based sampling menus. So a lot of hard work is going on. And talking about now these three youngsters, Chef Thomas Zakaria, Chef Girish Naik, and Chef Hussain, and all three of them are, they were nurtured under the stewardship of late Chef Floyd. Now, Thomas was the first chef, youngsters to take chef on tour, and wherein every once in 6 months, Bombay Canteen food, which was whatever the menu which they launched, actually traveled all over India and then got the best, and then given a little bit of, the tweak to Mumbaikas, what they would like to. And their concept is that, the menu pricing, which is moderately priced, wherein the customers have a wide choice to come and experience on whatever the menu, which is on the seasonality based. And next, talking about Hussain worked, and Mr. Hari was talking about 11 Madison Park. Chef Hussain worked in 11 Madison Park, and he got in touch with Chef Floyd, and then on that, he got an offer to open another restaurant of Floyd's. First, Chef Floyd started with Bombay Canteen, and the second one is O Pedro. O Pedro basically talking about the cuisine and culture of completely how the Indian food influenced by Portuguese, and how there are certain lesser known dishes which they could offer and they could commercialize it. That's what they did. Now, talking about Chef Girish Naik, is an amazing Indian, Mithai chef, and he could proudly call, he don't want to call himself that, as an corporate chef for the Bombay Canteen or Hunger International. But Chef Girish, hard work and determination and his passion towards baking and pastry arts, he got the basics, and he also graduated from Culinary Institute of America. And he trained in various pastry and bakers in all over the world. And then, and at the end of it, he decided that he wants to capitalize that Indian halwai, and how we can give a little bit of the texture and flavor changes within that, using Indian halwai techniques, and then infusing with the global ingredients. So that's what he's doing it with the Bombay sweets. And I'm sure that he has been doing a lot of R&D, and definitely it is going to be a super hit for the the people who wants to experience something Indian halwa. Now, what is it which we need to do? So far, I've just given a little bit detail about, maybe I would have forgotten some chefs, which sorry, but there is no disparity. I'm just saying that these are the chefs which I admire, but maybe I would have not touched upon other chefs as well. But the way forward, now all these chefs are doing excellent job. And I'm sure that we are a long way to go, like Mr. Hari was mentioning, that plant-based food. I think besides talking about the major regional cuisines, we also need to focus on micro cuisines. I think the micro cuisine, which I mean, I've been spending almost 20 years in the Udupi. We are close, 5 kilometers from Manipur. It's one of the South Indian cuisines culinary hub. But after coming to Udupi, I came to know that within the Udupi, you have so many cuisines which is based on community, like Shivalik Brahmin. You also talk about Bant cuisine. You also talk about Mugviras. And within this proximity, within 50, 60 kilometers, proximity, you have so many wide range of cuisines. So I think our job is to now to take this forward. And also, many of you know that we were very proud to share always that we talk about wine sommelier, or we talk about tea sommelier, but we talk about India as rich in spice and so many things. But I think time has come to, we need to market ourselves that the best, the spice connoisseur, or what you want to call it in, gastronomically. We don't have till now, one single emerging person saying that he or she is the best in tasting spices and identifying spices, about the flavor, aroma, and so on and so forth. Now I think a lot of chefs working on temple cuisines, we talk about prasad, we talk about naivedya. I think it could be a chapanbhog, or there's so many things are there. I think the plant-based food is getting popular, but I'm sure that if somebody is starting a restaurant which is purely based on temple cuisine, I'm sure that they will be having a big market for that. Now, Indian sweets are underestimated. We always often, talk about French pastries, or strudels from Austria, or we talk about panna cotta from Italy. But I think we can offer wide range of Indian mithais. People today talk about there are a lot of innovation has been gone for the Indian mithai, and I think most of you, those who are based in Bangalore or any part of India, you will come to know that the outlet like A2B, or it could be a Sangeeta, or it could be a Saravana. You see that there are a lot of Indian sweets made with jaggery. I think now Chef Girish is making Mysore Pak with pure coffee, the coffee flavored Mysore Pak. So far, we used to make the traditional, which focus on ghee, but people are trying to talk about how to reduce the calories. And because always people believe that Indian food is loaded with ghee or too much of fats and oil. I'm sure that a lot of youngsters, they have so much of passion, and I'm sure that with that we can able to showcase the lesser known cuisines from India. It could be micro cuisines, or it could be a cuisines from temple, or it could be from our Indian sweets. So with that, I thank all the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and I think I'll be ready for Q&A after my panelists once they have done with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chef. That was an amazing presentation. There's so much to think about. And I'm very happy that you're a principal of an organization, and I'm sure you're going to inspire generations. Our next talk is by Professor Krishnendu Ray. Professor Ray has received his PhD in sociology from SUNY in Birmingham in 2001. He holds a master's degree in political science from Delhi University, India. Prior to joining the NYU faculty in 2005, Ray was a faculty member and worked as an acting associate dean for curriculum development at the Culinary Institute of America. A food studies scholar, he is the author of The Migrant's Table, Meals and Memoirs in Bengali American Households. He co-edited along with Tulsi Srinivas, Curried Cultures, Globalization, Food and South Asia. His most recent monograph is The Ethnic Restaurateur. Over to you, Professor Ray.
Thank you, Dr. Deepa Prakash. And thanks everyone for having me here. I'm going to take 10 minutes to speak to this question of soft power. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Perfect. Welcome, everyone. We started with a terrific example, in fact, of 11 Madison Park, and that's the city I live in now. I'm going to speak to a little bit about questions of popularity and prestige of cuisines in a comparative sense of what are the various cuisines that have in some ways become visible over time. And this quickly gives you a cross-sectional analysis. So to set up the context for this discussion, and I hope there are a lot of questions in Q&A, to give you a sense of looking specifically at, say, American restaurants, which is one of the examples, and I'm going to compare data with London, for instance. We have about a little over 500,000 restaurants in the US. This was, of course, just pre-COVID. About 50% of them closed at one point of time, but most are coming back. We shall see what happens once the dust settles. Unlike what most people outside of the US often, in fact, think, when they think of American restaurants, they think of chains. And like McDonald's or KFC, etc. But in fact, most restaurants in the US are independent enterprises. They're not chains. They're often small and they serve a variety of foods. And the most popular are Italian American restaurants. And in fact, about 100,000 out of that 650,000 are Italian restaurants, and they divide about 60,000 pizzerias and about 40,000 other forms of Italian cuisines, like pasta, for instance. And keep an eye on that number. The number of people we are talking about in the US of Italian heritage is about 16 million people. And I think Harikiran referenced in some of the demographics, because partly the popularity and prestige of a cuisine, in fact, depends both on demographics and other aspects that I'm going to talk about. The second most popular cuisine in the US is Chinese American, and there are about 50,000 Chinese restaurants in the US. And if you look at that number, the number of people are 6 million in terms of demographics. And it's an old population, in fact, from the 19th century. And then the next one is Mexican American, which is the most popular, about 45,000. That number, in fact, is going to go up, while in fact the Chinese number is going to go down. And some of the Chinese restaurants are just in a phase of upscaling. But if you look at the demographics of the Mexican American population, 35 million, one of the largest groups currently, and it's going to impact hugely on what's going to happen in the near future. But just because you are a big demographic group doesn't mean you're always necessarily visible as that demographic group. For instance, to give you an example, the largest number of Americans, when they identify their heritage, are in fact German Americans. But we in fact don't see very many German American restaurants per se. And one of the argument is that because in fact, most what we call American restaurants are in fact German American restaurants, partly because of the demographic weight of this group and partly because the length of time it has been in the US. Of course, if you drink if you drink an American beer or if you drink an American wine, there's high likelihood you are also in fact digging into the German American heritage in the US, which is also with wine, of course, it's also Italian, it's also in fact Eastern European, etc. This is just to set up the comparative data frame about Indian American restaurants in the US, some of whom have acquired visibility, just as Chef Thiru was pointing out. There are about, I think Colleen and I decided a couple of years ago, made an estimate that there are about 4,000 Indian restaurants. And the number of people we are talking about is about 5 million people. So if you look at, say, compare the Chinese American to the Indian American, you're talking about 6 million people, 50,000 restaurants, you're talking about 5 million people, 4,000 restaurants, 10 to 12 times difference. And that difference is related to demographics. About 70% of Indians in the US have a bachelor's degree, and they are Anglophone, and they have other career alternatives. If they do, it is less likelihood that they get into the restaurant business. So that, in fact, is an intriguing question about who gets into the restaurant business and who stays out of it. Another way of thinking about popularity is what are people talking about? Okay, popularity is partly what's happening materially out there. I showed you the numbers. The second aspect of popularity is what sociologists call discursive popularity, which is, in this case, the New York Times, through its print run. The three cuisines that are most discussed in the New York Times are Italian, Chinese, and French, predictably. And Italian numbers have been up, Chinese numbers also have been up. French numbers, in fact, have been going down relatively recently. Indian falls in the second cluster, which is Japanese, American, Mexican, and Indian. Then you see the third cluster, which is Greek, Spanish, Thai, etc. So there is discussion of Indian food and Indian cuisine in, and I have done this analysis with every major newspaper in the United States. It's a very similar pattern if you take the Chicago Tribune, if you take the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle. This is the other data on prestige. If price is a surrogate for prestige, then this is from Zagat's data, from publicly available Zagat's data from 1986 to the last time they printed price data, which was in 2016. It's about a 40-year period. And some of the most intriguing things, of course, is how Japanese cuisine has become much more pricey in the United States and much more visible. French had always been quite high in the ranking. This is on the right side. If you look at Japanese there, French, some of the most expensive restaurants in Masa in New York City are Japanese. But of course, French restaurants are still very important. And then especially American and especially New American, like say 11 Madison Park is an example of that. That has acquired prestige over the last 20 years, 30 years, that it did not used to have. Continental is slowly becoming invisible and going out of view. That used to be an American notion of elite European cuisine, but that is in some ways coming to an end, that period. Here you have Italian. Italian data here is slightly anomalous. Remember I said the price of Italian food, which is linked to the prestige of Italian food, has been going up in New York City and other American cities. But here it looks like it is going down. That is partly because the number of pizzerias have proliferated, which of course is a cheaper version of Italian cuisine. After that, predictably, it's Spanish. The two categories of cuisine that are emerging with the greatest force and climbing up in terms of the prestige ladder today in New York City are Greek and Korean. And then you also see Vietnamese. Mexican is a mixed bag in some ways like Indian. where Mexican, in fact, most Mexican restaurants are relatively cheap, and some are high prestige restaurants. Indian restaurant have been stuck in a place where about, say, out of let's say currently about 300 Indian restaurants, about only 10 are at high visible, high priced out of the 300, and they are compared to most of the restaurants that are in fact mid-market to cheap. Chinese is in a similar kind of a state, and there are other categories. This data is Yelp data, and what it allows us to talk about is the Zagat's data is more middle brow, which is what is popular amongst lawyers, physicians, who are not tastemakers in a place like New York City. You have a much younger population, more avant-garde. They become more visible, in fact, in the Yelp data than in the Zagat's data. This is, of course, also just before the pandemic. I want to draw your attention to what's on the y-axis. You can see the popularity of Italian and Chinese, and then Mexican, the three most popular cuisines in New York City. Then it goes down Seoul, Japanese. You have to look at the position 10 or 11 to find Indian there, okay, both in terms of popularity. Second, I want to draw your attention to this whole question of upscale and prestigious. All the chefs and all the restaurants that Chef Thiru mentioned fall within the category of the 3%. Only 3% of Indian restaurants in New York City are upscale. Compared to what? Compared to about 27% of French restaurants in New York City are upscale, which is the highest. Then the New American, which is like 11 Madison Park, about 24%. Then you have Italian at 12%. Mexican, in fact, is much higher right now at 6%. So Indian is at 3%, like Arab, a little above Chinese, etc. So it gives you a sense of the limits also in this, what I have called in my book, the hierarchy of taste in the ethnic restaurateur. And so in some ways, if you compare this, so of course the New York data should be compared with data, for instance, in London. I also want to draw your attention to the y-axis here, which is, if you saw with the New York City, Italian food, the top three are Italian, Chinese, and Mexican. And in London, predictably, Indian food is the most popular. But what is also heartening is that in London, about 12% of Indian restaurants are upscale. So it's a much wider base, not just a narrow curry houses. There are, of course, cheap curry houses, but there are also like all kinds of interesting places like Jikoni, like Asma Khan's, Darjeeling Express, and many others, which is much more innovative. Then it's Italian and then American. So in some ways, my argument is that what Indian food is to London, Italian food is to New York City, or the other way around. What Italian food is to New York City, which is a wide range, wide price range, including upscale, mid-market, down market, you see that visibility in terms of Indian restaurants in London. So to finish off at the limit of 10 minutes, is popularity and prestige of cuisines are not randomized. They in fact exhibit patterns. There's a hierarchy of taste, and that hierarchy changes over time. Today, I just gave you a cross-sectional analysis because I don't have time to look at historically how tastes have changed. For instance, Italian cuisine used to be mocked and was a cuisine that was not respected amongst restaurant critics, American critics, almost into the 1980s. So it's about a 40-year phenomenon now, and that is partly linked to questions of upward mobility of the Italian American population and all kinds of interesting demographic dynamics. And as I've said before, some cuisines, such as say German or Irish, are in fact hidden in plain view as American cuisine. They are not named as with a separate identity from American cuisine. And the hierarchy is slightly different in different cities. I just showed you New York and I compared it to London. I've done similar analysis with Yelp data for Chicago, for LA, for San Francisco. They're slightly different. For instance, San Francisco tend to be a little more Francophile. Chicago tends, in fact, is much more innovative about upscale Mexican food, as Colleen knows, one of the other panelists, compared to, in fact, New York City. So I'll end with a few kind of speculations about Indian food in the US. The restaurants that have been referenced before are a thin edge of high prestige restaurants. And the positive prospects are that New York City, American cities, any global city today has a substantial cohort of professional classes of South Asian origin, and prestige spreads, in fact, across, laterally across demographically to other groups. And that's the positive prospect of, and Indians come with I would say positive stereotypes, which can be mildly negative as geeks. Presumably, Indian men are very smart, but not very good with women. And so those are, and you can see that in Hollywood stereotypes about it, which is not a stereotype that's particularly damaging. In fact, it's kind of, they're all endearing characters. Mildly awkward, but very smart, presumably. And of course, I think it was Hari Kiran who already referenced the popularity of yoga and alternative health and questions of cultural density and cultural reputation. And that is one of the areas of positive potential. And but as I have said before, to give you a realistic sense, though, we are talking about, in some ways, a narrow range. And most Indian restaurants are run by Bangladeshi in major Western cities. There is a demographic profile that, as I've said, is different. They're not college graduates. Most are Anglophone. In fact, the Indian profile is closer to the US Jewish profile rather than even Italians. The upside of that, it comes with prestige. The downside of it is most people don't get involved in the restaurant business. And we have seen that with the Jewish population, which is other people are making Jewish food now in New York City, not mostly the Jewish population. And we see that kind of the limits of this question of Indian cuisine in a global city. And not exactly equal to the location of Italian food in this world that I'm analyzing. Italian food has been upscaling, both popular and upscale. Mexican food, not as upscale, but there's an avant-garde quality to it, and that's partly linked to demographic weight, partly linked to various kinds of challenges. And so I'll end with this last comment, which is there's a supply side challenge and then there's a demand side challenge. The supply side challenge is we have relatively few instances of new style, innovative style Indian restaurants in New York City. The most recent ones discussed are Sona, Hari Naik's Place, and Dhamaka, for instance, which need money, $1 million, $2 million, and you need a signature chef with it. And the demand side of the problem is that the palate of Americans are still relatively limited now in terms of what has been talked about regional Indian cuisines, especially micro cuisines. And Indian food in that sense is Indian food. To speak about Indian food is to speak about something like European food. I think it's too large, too unwieldy, too unspecific. We have to get a lot more smaller, narrower, regional and micro cuisine. So much, in fact, depends on a second generation. To give you an analogy, what David Chang did with East Asian, which is he comes out of a Taiwanese heritage, plays with Chinese concepts, mainland Chinese concepts, plays with Korean concepts, and especially Japanese concepts. And we would, I think, to break through that threshold, you would need second generation. and investment, substantial investment, both in terms of capital and in some ways cultural capital, to have the impact that others have had. So anyway, thank you. Let me stop here so that we can move on to the next panelist.
That was a fantastic talk, Professor Ray. I can't wait to read your books. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next talk is by Colleen. She was born in Toronto, Canada, and received her BA Honours and MA in Slavic Studies from the University of Toronto, and her PhD in Slavic Languages and Literature from Columbia University, New York. Her contributions to the field include articles and reviews on interwar Polish literature and many translations from Polish and Russian, including Roy Medvedev's Let History Judge, The Origins and Consequences of Stalinism. Colleen Sen has studied and enjoyed South Asian cuisine for years, sharing her understanding, insights, and appreciation of Indian food, culture with readers and audiences around the world. Over to you, Colleen.
Well, thank you very much. Being one of the last speakers, the previous speakers have covered a lot of what I was going to say, so my talk will be short. But I did want to comment on a couple of things that I thought were interesting. One is Mr. Badlamani mentioned about the efforts of other governments to promote Indian food. I used to be a regular attendee at the Oxford Food Symposia, which were very prestigious, and they got in the habit of having these wonderful lunches. And it got to the point that governments would be sponsoring the lunches. So one year, the Malaysian government sponsored a lunch. Another year, the Spanish government donated one of these fantastically expensive Spanish hams. So at the time, I was thinking, why doesn't this is an opportunity for Indian government, maybe working through local restaurants, to really get visibility among a very elite group of people, of writers and others. The other, I like the chef's talk, and I was kind of both surprised and horrified by how many of those restaurants I've been to, and there's a lot more to go. One thing I think is very interesting that's happening, and you mentioned Chef Cardoz, but there's also, I think, been an internationalization of the world of food. One of the centers of this is Noma in Copenhagen, which is consistently voted the #1 restaurants. There are quite a few Indian chefs, including one in Chicago. We have a wonderful restaurant called Roo, which is associated with the Delhi Roo. The chef Sahil there trained at Noma. Chef Aurora, who was mentioned, did. And in fact, they were even going to have a reunion of Noma trained Indian chefs in Chicago this year, but it had to be canceled because of COVID. And I think it's very interesting that you have this. And it's not, fusion is a word one doesn't use anymore, but I think the application of different techniques to different ingredients is being very fruitful. You see this in Mumbai. The chefs at the great Mumbai restaurants have worked in the US, at some of the great restaurants. And I think there's a lot more interchange now, which I think can only benefit Indian cuisine by making it perhaps more accessible to a certain category of diners, the elite diners that Krishnendu mentioned. My talk is really going to be more historical. I give a lot of talks on Indian food. And one thing I like to make is that I would say historically that India has been the most influential, my country is not the right word, say South Asia region in the world in terms of influencing the way the world eats. And that sounds like a rather dramatic statement, but I think there's no continent where you don't have a very definite influence of India. And this goes back to ancient times. Of course, we have spices, which is why the West came to India in the first place, but it even goes back to the Harappan civilization that started around 3000 BCE. There was a lot of, they used turmeric, black and long pepper, and cardamom. There was a lot of trade, and you have even as far as Egypt, and some of the mummies the rulers were buried with black peppercorns from India in their nostrils. And so obviously the spice is one of India's great contributions. And there are many plants and vegetables that originated in India. One is the eggplant. And I always think the brinjal is the most emblematic of all Indian vegetables. I could talk forever about the eggplant. And it was something that the Westerners took and spread to the rest of the world. The Spanish took it to South America, it's all over. The mango is another fruit that you find everywhere in South America, and of course the jackfruit. So these are, I mean, this is historically information, but still, it shows you that these things are part of the world cuisine. Another great contribution is sugar. Although sugarcane probably didn't originate in India, certainly the techniques for converting the juice to products was developed in India. And these products, of course, include jaggery, khand, and solids called sarkara in Sanskrit. And this is where our words from candy and sugar come from. And this spread to the Caribbean. And as I'll mention later, this was kind of the source of another Indian import to the Caribbean. I was going to talk about Indian food in Britain because I think it's become such an integral part of the British life. It's hardly considered foreign anymore. And the chef did a brilliant job of taking us through all the Indian restaurants there, and I think that was just very interesting. One reason I think that Indian food is much more popular in the US than in England than in the US is you have these cultural ties. I mean, India is very much a part of the British consciousness, maybe the subconscious, I don't know. But you saw that, in the current political situation, there's this kind of nostalgia for the old days. And I think there's a certain identification with India, which Americans lack. And Madhur Jaffrey once said, and I've never found this quote, but I've heard it, that Americans like countries of the food of countries they've been to war with. And that includes Japan, it includes Vietnamese, which is a very popular food. It includes China to some degree. India, I think, is kind of peripheral to the American psyche. I think one thing, I don't know much about this, but is Silicon Valley, because Professor Ray mentioned that, this kind of geeky American elite. And I really don't know what's happening out there. There maybe, I've heard rumors that there's interesting restaurants opened, and that may be a place where innovation would start. Certainly in Chicago, it's a quite different scene from New York. We have hardly any Bangladeshis. The main ethnic groups are people from Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, and Kerala. And so we have quite a few kind of Andhra restaurants, Hyderabadi food, Gujarati thali, but these are not high-end by any means. And I think they're probably mostly visited by people from that community. Gujarati food is just amazing. I remember the original chef of Benares, I talked to him years ago, and I told him that, and he says, yes, that's the real Indian food. And I think so much could be done, but it's just one of the hundreds of distinctive cuisines in India that one would want to have. It wasn't mentioned, but certainly the curry houses and the Balti houses and that kind of restaurant in England are facing a crisis now because the second and third generation just don't want to go into the restaurant business. They want to become professional. And there's also curbs on immigration in Britain. So I think you'll see a decline in that kind of, popular restaurant. Let's go out for a beer and have a curry restaurant. But certainly the high level, the Michelin star restaurants in London, I used to say they had no equivalent, but I don't think that's true anymore. Certainly in Mumbai, you have these wonderful restaurants like Mumbai Canteen, and I'm trying to think of another one I went to where they have a prefix menu, and it's just the restaurants there are just amazing. I was going to mention tea. Of course, that's another of India's great contributions to the world historically. And I think most people know the history of that, so I won't go into that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Caribbean because I used to go to the Caribbean, Trinidad, especially a lot in business. And I think the food of the Indian diaspora is very interesting. And I'm from Toronto originally, and of course, Canada has an enormous immigration, both from South Asia and from the Caribbean. And you have there's a joke that samosas and Trinidad rotis are like the national dishes now. You see samosa stands in the Union Station. You see roti stands everywhere. I mean, it's really become a part of even my 90-year-old mother, who's English, I mean, even she would want samosas all the time. So that's kind of integrated into the Canadian lifestyle, I think, because of the sheer size of the population. And in that case, I think there is a correlation. And of course, the diaspora in the Caribbean, it really started in the 1830s when the British abolished slavery in the West Indies. So the East India Company began recruiting laborers, and they were mainly from Bihar and Eastern UP. And the food that they brought with them, the food that they recreated there was very much the food that you would find in this region. The common spices are things like cumin, coriander, fenugreek, and turmeric. You find all these wonderful little snacks that are served that are that have you can find when you go to Eastern India. And then the national dish of Trinidad is this roti, and roti is basically a big wheat kind of baked bread. It's covered with ground yellow peas, and it's wrapped around a meat or fish curry, and then you kind of eat it on the go. And as I said, this is very popular in Canada. Probably in parts of New York you find it, but I think it's another way in a sense of introducing Indian food to people. I'll just talk a little bit about a couple of kind of aberrations in the Indian food world, and one is Japan. Curry is extremely popular in Japan. You actually have two kinds of restaurants. You have kind of standard Indian restaurants, and then you have curry houses. But the curry is really more of a household dish. It's been voted one of the most popular dishes among school children. And what it is, it's kind of meat, carrots, and onions, and it's simmered in this ochre-colored kind of curry-flavored, slightly sweetish sauce, and it's very unattractive. You serve it over rice, and it's kind of the antithesis of Japanese food, which we think of as very elegant presentation. It's really maybe there's some subconscious longing among the Japanese that they want something that isn't little elegant pieces, and it's extremely popular. And the origins are kind of interesting because in the 19th century, when they opened Japanese ports to foreigners, the British officers of the Royal Navy used to have a curry day once a month in their ships. And the Japanese government wanted to encourage people to eat more meat, young men, to make them more militarily strong. And this seemed to be a good way of introducing it into their diet. So this curry tradition is continued today by it's called the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, which is really the Japanese Navy. And every Friday they have a curry day, and each ship has its own curry. And they often feature things like coffee, cheese, and ketchup. And there's even a book published with all these recipes. So I think certainly Japan would be a market for if one wants to promote Indian food abroad. You also have, of course, the wonderful story of this Bengali revolutionary Bose who opened a real curry restaurant and is one of the largest. His family manufactures it. I was going to close a little bit about talking about Indian food in the US, but I think Professor Ray's covered that pretty much. I was going to actually segue into him if he followed me, just to note why the popularity of Indian food in the US isn't as great as it is compared with other cuisines. And I think he gave a wonderful and a very data-driven explanation of that. Certainly in Chicago, we have one really nice restaurant, which is Rue, with a Noma-trained chef. It's enormously popular. I think if more restaurants like that opened, there's no doubt in my mind that they would have a following. And I think that the direction that the chef gave in how this could take form in the sense of temple food, micro cuisines, and sweets is a very, very good direction. And I think it'll take quite a bit of education. Maybe the government needs to hire a very good PR firm to help promote Indian food in the United States. So with that, I'll end my talk, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Colleen. That was amazing. I commend the organizers for putting together speakers of this fantastic caliber. I think this recording is going to go viral in my fraternity of food scientists. I'm very grateful to be over here. I have a few questions. At the outset, I do understand that we have paucity of time, and I have a few questions for all the speakers, and I'm running this call from my phone. So in the instance of my not being able to look at the audience raising their hand, I request Varsha to help me. My first question is to Colleen. Have you found any research in connection of food originating from South America and India having similarities or a connection, ma'am?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned Guyana. Of course, Guyana is the other place where a lot of the laborers went in the 19th century. And Guyana food it's very similar to Trinidadian food. Again, it has a very strong Bihari influence. But as far as the rest of South America, that's a very good question, like Brazil and Argentina. I would suspect there's not very much there. But this is something to look into. So thank you for that question.
Lovely. And have you seen Indian food, at least the base of Indian food, like what you're talking about curry in the Japanese Navy is extremely new information to me. Did you in your research find any other armed forces, military having Indian food as part of their diet?
No, but I was going to mention that the other country where you have a curry is very popular is Korea. I don't know if it's part of the military, but because of their relationship, both positive and negative with Korea, because they were occupied, the Koreans were occupied Japan. You also have a very similar kind of curry in Korea. I just discovered this by accident in a Korean grocery store, and I bought some. I haven't used it, but of course, Korean food can be very, very spicy, very spicy. So they have a very, very spicy version of curry, and that may be one reason why it's popular there.
Great, thank you so much. Professor Ray, I have a question for you, please. Do you see Southeast Asian cuisine having potential to catch up with Chinese food? I'm not specifically talking about Indian food, but as a collective set of cuisines from Southeast Asia, do you see it having potential to catch up with Chinese food?
Just a quick clarification. Do you mean Southeast Asia or do you mean South Asia? Southeast Asia as in Thailand or South Asia as in India?
Southeast Asia as in Thailand and other countries around it.
Okay, good. So in fact, Thai food is very popular in the US, and there's also a kind of, it can sometimes figure well in the hierarchy of taste. But the demographics are very small. There are only a few thousand Thai in, for instance, New York City. But most of them are involved in the restaurant business. And that links to the bigger argument. That is partly because I think Harikaran pointed out, that's partly because of this soft power initiative of the Thai government, where it in fact helps these restaurateurs, helps with investments, helps with, in some ways, acquisitions of the right kind of paperwork to become visible. So in some ways, Thai food is Thai, Vietnamese, Cambodian are doing quite well, popular, but smaller category of cuisine. And especially Thai is a lot more visible precisely because of the push for soft power, both in terms of restaurants, but also in terms of, by the way, if you buy coconut milk, canned coconut milk in a standard grocery store in New York City, it's in all probability, it has been canned in Thailand. And that's part of this initiative of the Thai government to push Thai produce. If you buy jasmine rice in New York City, high likelihood that it is in some ways going to be Thai. So that's visible. The government is doing a lot more, a lot aggressive. And in spite of the relatively small demographic, the Thai demographics in the US is much smaller than, say, Indians.
Professor Ray, I have one more question, please. Two more. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to hog up everybody's question answer time. So, Professor Ray, do you see traceability in agriculture, traceability in agro-technology being a factor in the global restaurant space?
Yes. I mean, for instance, one of the big challenges, like with fish, in fact, most people, most of the time, do not exactly know what fish they're eating, especially in the Western world, where mostly your serving is fillet. And in that, there's a big challenge in traceability, especially for questions of sustainability. So there are basically three drivers of traceability, three important drivers of traceability. One is the question of sustainability, environmental sustainability. Second, of course, with the Chinese example, contamination, we saw questions about health. Okay, and the question of what you are exactly eating, can you be sure about it, etc. I said 3, but now I have forgotten what's the third point. I lost my chain of thought as my mom is walking behind me in the camera. So that distracted me. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So we're starting with the whole concept of Ayurvedic foods and yogic foods, right? Yoga foods, foods which are supportive of the very core of essence of Bharatiya culture. Do you see an opportunity for food of this cadre, this genre rather, to wind up in the pricey segment or the moderately priced segment?
Yes, possible. I mean, I would say 2 things. I mean, Indian food is a whole range of foods, including pre-Vedic foods and post-Vedic foods. And all those show up in very interesting ways, including, of course, Vedic food. And Ayurveda is a kind of an important part of it and visible to it. But no one has successfully pulled that off. There's some amount of course, I think it was Hari Kiran who said a vegetable forward cuisine, it shows up in that. But for instance, the use of lentils and legumes, which are an important source of protein, because if you're going to eat vegetarian food, you will have to balance a certain amount of proteins in it. And South Asian cuisine is fantastic in shoring it up with beans, but they are not yet part of as clearly the part of the repertoire of high-end cuisine. So I think what Colleen said is room for innovation. And I think what the chef was registering with various kinds of cuisine, including temple cuisines, for instance, is an open field. I mean, there are some vague overgeneralizations about Indian food. Everyone claims all kinds of Ayurvedic curative power, and it works up to a point, but I think it has to be specified rather than as generic as it is today. So not as developed domain needs a further elaboration around it.
Thank you, Professor Ray. I have a question for Chef Thiru. Chef, your talk was incredible. And it kind of gave us a very beautiful global perspective of what we are experiencing in Indian food. I have 2 questions. One is, time and again, there have been chains, South Indian chains, North Indian chains, which are established in India, asking, can we bring things down to a science of automation? If like any McDonald's or KFC, do you think Indian food can actually have premix form which can be replicated across the globe with, the precision and scale at which other fast food restaurants run?
Yeah, ma'am, good that you asked this. One of my friend, if you see that, the brand called Udupi Ruchi, their idea was, to establish like a McDonald's or chain of South Indian restaurant focusing on abroad. So they came out with all pre-mixed food, including starting from wide range of even the chutneys. There are 10 varieties of chutneys. But they started a couple of restaurants within Bangalore, and as well as they ventured into east and western part of India. But they could not succeed. I don't know. Still, we believe that whatever which freshly made, that is what going to, brings out flavor and texture. But I'm sure that now Chef Thomas Zakaria is working on the modular, cooking units, wherein you can program, working with the engineers, and he is the chef who's giving, consultant for them. And so I'm sure that, this is going to, come in the future. But I'm giving a current examples what Udupi Ruchi had gone through. And even today also they have a wide range of premixed South Indian food. And I'm changing trends and customer dynamics. I'm sure that the technology will come into play. But at the end of it, we believe that, like Vijayalakshmi madam said, that opening address, if you're not in good mood, don't enter in kitchen. So ultimately, every recipe has soul, right? So what goes into, whether it's a commercial form or you prepare for a group of small people, technology is one side and our belief system is one side, but commercialization will happen, and sure, there will be some change in coming years.
Last question, Chef.
Yes,
We've been talking about Michelin stars.
right.
Is it something in the pipelines from the chefs? I understand you have IFCA, you have very active groups of chefs in India. Is it something in the pipelines where we could have our own star rating from India for our chefs?
Yes, ma'am. I think what has happened currently. All of them, trying to get under one forum, that Indian Federation of Culinary Association partnered with WAX. They are coming up with a lot of awareness program, including about healthy eating. They are doing a lot of campaigning in schools. When we talk about the commercial rating of restaurants, I think we are a long way to go. I am sure that we have great potential to equivalent to compare with our restaurants, with a Michelin star, or what we want to do in Indian context. There are a lot of agency, Times Food Guide Award, and then the TripAdvisor rating. The different agencies are rating now restaurants. I'm sure that under all, North Indian Culinary Chefs Association, we have 4 regions, and I think sure it will come in future. But it is high time for us to, create that kind of awareness among the commercial operators, as well as the chefs who are working for them, and the organizations to come forward. And it should be transparent, and as well as it should be fair to, that kind of rating should come, so that it's a win-win situation for the chefs community, and entrepreneurs, and the commercial operators.
True, very true. Thank you so much, Chef.
Thank you.
We have overshot time, I think, by 6 minutes. And it's taking me self-control to actually stop the Q&A session. And thank you very much. All speakers are absolutely fantastic, outstanding narrative and discussion. I now hand over to Ms. Arunima for the vote of thanks.
I would like to just add a small thing here. I'm sure you all do know there are 3 wonderful ancient Indian cookbooks. One is Kshema Kutuhalam, one is Bhojana Kutuhalam, and the other is Pakadarpanam. These are all, I really don't like to date things, because somewhere, we forget that ours is a very, very ancient culture. Anyway, the Pakadarpanam is from the Mahabharata period, and Kshema Kutuhalam, Bhojana Kutuhalam are from the 16th century, but based on works that are much earlier than the 10th century. And chefs should really look at this, because the kind of recipes there are so interesting that things that have come much later may pale into insignificance. The way they have used flowers, the way they use baking, the way they use coals, and the way they use plant leaves is amazing and interesting.
Yes.
I think Chef Thiru, you should be, having a look at all that. I have messaged you the links.
Sure, definitely.
Thank you all so much. Now I'll hand it over to Arunima to finish.
Thank you so much, Akka, and everybody who joined us this morning. It has been truly a fascinating conversation, from curry and literally going beyond that, to the challenges, to the opportunities. And Chef Thiru, thank you for highlighting. Sometimes, when we are looking at the work that we're doing, we miss out on people who are actually contributing to the initiative of taking Indian cuisine to the world. And similarly, thank you, Ms. Colleen and Professor Krishnendu, for your insights on Indian cuisine traveling across the world, and also the potential that lies ahead of us. With that, I'd like to thank all of you again, and thank you, Dr. Deepa, for moderating this session. Wonderfully done. With that, we take your leave. Namaste.
Thank you.